Yeah, so I'm with Houston Wilderness, and we, for those of you that don't know much about us, our elevator speech is that we preserve, promote, and protect the 10 ecoregions by conserving. Well, we do try to do that. Convening, problem solving, and educating. So what you've heard a lot of today is, I'm sort of a piece of that puzzle. You've heard the academic and sort of science piece, and you've heard the working on a corporate private landowner concept. And what Houston Wilderness does, not only do we convene on a variety of issues of the day of importance, and I passed around earlier one that we're doing with the Corps of Engineers on mitigation banking. I thought you'd like to see that since you all are going to hear about mitigation banking later from the Corps. But we also try to provide resources and reach out to policymakers and others on issues that are growing in the environmental community, and we need to provide that kind of information to policymakers. So with that in mind, this particular presentation is really, and the policy paper that is corresponds with it, which is you can find on our website, is really targeted in many ways to the policymaker. It's for anyone who want to help understand or help bridge ecosystem services and what they can do with infrastructure decisions. So it does say small government, but really it's any government, that we can try to have this impact on. You heard both Jims indicate that we've got a ways to go in policymakers thinking about ecosystem services as a value. So when a permit is issued to allow development in a wetland area, wouldn't it be great if eventually, as they're looking at that permit, they're thinking to themselves, all right, that's going to bring this much value in tax and, tax base, et cetera, but this is the value I'm losing. Even if they don't specifically right away know what that value number is, just the idea that, wow, I do know that there are ecosystem services or nature's benefits or whatever word that has hopefully gotten into their psyche that we're going to lose, it's valuable that we're going to lose by doing this development. So that's kind of what this is targeted toward, and it's meant to be for anyone to use. This is also available on our website for that purpose. So in doing that, again, you all already heard this from Jim, I don't need to repeat it, but another point is that with this presentation is that because we're targeting the policy maker, it's much more at the 50,000 feet level. So he went into much more technical. We go sort of a little broader in just describing generally what an ecosystem service is. And I don't have to do that. You all have already heard that today. We talk a little bit about the diversity of the Houston region. Again, this is really a presentation that could be in a variety of different areas, but for purposes of example, we really talk about Houston's ecologically diverse region and give them a chance to take away all that white space that we saw in those photographs, which are important, but to remind them of what was underneath there before all that was developed, and give them kind of more spatially idea of what ecologically we have or we had, and we certainly want to get a little of it back. I want to take a little bit of an aside and mention that the environmental community in our 8-county region is currently working with governmental entities and some businesses, in fact, on an 8-county regional conservation plan. The idea behind this plan is that every environmental project going on in the region, and by project, that's a project that has some amount of funding that's still necessary for the project to be completed, or perhaps it needs all its funding, is included in this plan. And the reason it's in this presentation is because it's part of the environmental community's recognition as a way, and governmental community, as a way to help policymakers and funding decision makers understand kind of the bigger picture of what's going on. In other words, all the various environmental projects going on, they might be an individual project, but they have connectivity with one another as it relates to the health of our region. And by the way, there's a whole lot of additional information you can get on this plan on our website under partners.
I was just going to say, is that list available?
Yeah.
Can we review it and add projects to it?
Absolutely, and I actually know Dex Unlimited's been real involved in that. Yeah, it's on the website under partners, there's what we call a working list, and it's called that because this plan isn't finite. It any environmental related or conservation related project going on that's not on that list, we want to be on that list. So we add to it as we find out things. We have, we think, a pretty good idea of a good bit of the projects, but by all means, we want to make sure that we include all of them. And in fact, at the break, I talked to Jim Blackburn about perhaps even talking with the steering committee involved in this effort about including at least the concept of maybe some of the corporate projects or some of the stewardship of private landowner efforts as part of this plan, if it as it becomes a project, including it in as a plan. It may not be a phase 1 land acquisition priority plan, it might, but certainly, this is meant to include everything. It's not meant to say, oh no, you're ExxonMobil and that's nice, you're doing a conservation project, but we don't want to include it. Well, no, actually, that would be a project. It would be something that would be considered for the plan. This talks a little bit about the fact that the diversity in our region leads to a phenomenal amount of ecosystem services opportunities. You've heard that, right? So we've got forests, we've got wetlands, upland and estuarine, and we've got the prairies. And so when we talk about ecosystem services, it's huge compared to perhaps other regions that don't have that level of diversity. And then we narrowed it down into 3 areas because generally 3s, as I'm sure most of you know, is a good way. I've been in public policy for over 30 years, and if you give a legislator or a generally an elected official more than 3, you're going to lose them or her. It just 3 works pretty well. So that's and interestingly, I've noticed that's been a trend this morning that we've kind of talked in those 3s. So wetland and estuaries, prairies. And forests. And this is the list of ecosystem services, much the way you've kind of seen it this morning. But then we took it and we took it out so that, hopefully this is something that they could capture a little bit easier. So for instance, coastal wetland marshes, the ecosystem services range from the carbon dioxide sequestration to water recreation and fishing, the wildlife habitat, flood prevention, polluted water. And we've got these for all 3. So there's prairies, giving a lot, and this gives an opportunity if, for instance, we want to, let's say we're talking to Commissioner Raddick with Harris County, for instance. This may not necessarily, it's interesting to him, but it's probably not going to resonate too much. But this one we can really zero in. A lot of his precinct has this type of ecosystem in it. And so we can talk about flood control, huge issue for him. He knows the weaknesses that exist at Addicks and Barker Reservoir. We can talk a little bit about carbon sequestration, increased habitat and ecotourism. That's a big deal to Commissioner Raddick, so we really would want to talk a bit about that and just kind of give him an idea that, there's 9 different aspects of ecosystem services, among others, that he could be thinking about when they're looking at flood control issues, they're looking at land development, and additional subdivisions going into his precinct, that kind of thing. Or for that matter, when he's thinking about additional park expansion, which he does on a regular basis. And then forests. Our northern forests, of course, are important too. And we have the urban reforestation efforts that are going on. So again, 9, I think it's 8, 9, and 9. Yeah, 8, 9, and 9 on sort of a way to think about it in terms of numbers. I mean, that's a lot of ecosystem services. And some of them are actually doubled in terms of different benefits. And then once again, here's sort of a third way to kind of go at it and look at it, all 3 of the areas in terms of which ones do multiple things. So water quality are all 3, flood protection, carbon sequestration, et cetera. And then some of them obviously are more specific to an ecosystem. And then we talk a little bit about all the different players involved in this process. So you all are hearing from all of them today. But it's interesting, this slide is interesting. I've done this presentation in a variety of different places, and this one I've noticed gets people writing, which is a good thing. But there really is a little bit of everybody involved. What you don't see here really looking at understanding ecosystem services or corporations, but I learned last week at a roundtable at Rice University that I probably should add them because they are very much interested in, and as Jim Blackburn was saying, they are understanding that it affects their bottom line in a positive way. Dow Chemical is an example, but there's a growing number of other ones as well. So I need to add them to that mix. So this is where we explain that as one, that these issues are not anti-development, which is important, but that indeed there's a recognition that development is going to happen in our region, and that is a healthy thing, but that in considering ecosystem services, those developments can all be done in a way that is much more beneficial to all of humanity, because those ecosystem services hopefully are captured in a way that provides long-term water quality, air quality, or better and enhanced ecosystem services. So that just gives you a little bit of an idea of some of the areas that where we talk about infrastructure. And then we explain gray infrastructure versus green. To this audience, that's obvious, and you all sort of know that, but that's still, I think, a growing, wouldn't you say, Jim, still a growing aspect of a policymaker's concept of the fact that you can relate ecosystem services and the development of green infrastructure as potentially even a replacement for gray infrastructure. So we tee it up a little bit of explaining, and then we give a couple examples. One not here, and then two in our region, although I think I'm going to add a third one soon that I've just recently heard about. So you all are probably most familiar with this New York example. It's a big example, but it's one that resonates well, so I like to talk about it. It's the one where New York City was recognizing that its water quality, which everybody, it's world known, and a lot of the aspects of the food industry and the drinking water of New York City is critical to its survival, among other things, but also to its tourism and to its, like I said, to its food industry, et cetera. So when they recognized that they were under threat of having polluted water, and they were going to have to look at billions and billions of dollars to clean up that water, they chose an ecosystem service option instead. And that was, they created this whole farm program where farmers instituted, and it was a memorandum of understanding with the municipal and county officials and some nonprofit involvement with these landowners. But they instituted pollution control designs. They set aside key critical upstream land for this purpose, and they saved billions of dollars. They protected the pristine water supply. They avoided building those very, very expensive treatment plants, and ultimately, it's been an example across the nation and other parts of the world of how you can go about doing large landscape ecosystem services protection for purposes of a large urban core. I mean, New York City, which is pretty phenomenal, but it's been a huge success, and based on green infrastructure to solve a human welfare, health and welfare problem. And here's two local examples. If you all are familiar with Project Braze, the picture shows Braze Bio Marsh at Mason Park, but Braze Bio actually has 5 what I call filtering feature nodes, where and you all heard earlier about how developed Braze Bio is. So the idea behind these was that they would redirect the biowater into these filtering features, which also serve as flood detention areas. And originally, in fact, some of them, like Art Story Park, were just big holes in the ground. They turned them into filtering features, which were much more attractive, put the wetland grasses in there, allowed the engineering to work so that they basically flow through those wetland grasses for up to 48 hours. And of course, the idea was that it would clean the water as it would then headed back into Braze Bio. There have not been, which you've heard a little bit about the need for a lot of these ecosystem service studies, there's not been a lot of studies on the result of those efforts. I mean, they're fabulous. Harris County supports them. They put a lot of money into them. But we don't have, I can't show you a slide that says, and look, 400% reduction in pollution, or look, the upstream from the Arthur Story filtering feature upstream from that, the pollution sites show real high E. coli, but after the filtering feature it shows low. I should be able to do that at this point. A lot of these have been in place for many years. And in fact, we just finished Rice University yesterday, saw presentations by students who tried to do that. And they got really good results on white oak. The areas that are not concrete were much lower in pollution than the concrete channel pollution levels, or water quality levels. But interestingly, it's lower. It's actually worse when it comes out of the filtering feature. I shouldn't be saying this out loud. And we're going to change that. But you know why, though? Interestingly, and see, this is why this whole process is so important, that we understand the biggest picture. It's actually a lot. They think the problem is what I heard termed the feral hogs of our waterways. It's the grass carp are landing in these filtering features and eating all the wetland grasses up. So its purpose of being this green infrastructure is not serving the role it could be. So we're going to be holding a meeting soon with the powers that be that can help try to solve that problem and see if we can solve it. But anyway, so that's one example. And then you all, I don't know if most of you know about the Dow Chemical example. The tree planting work, or the forestation work that Dow Chemical is doing, is it was already talked about by, I think, Jim Blackburn. But this actually, the one we're highlighting is the engineered wetlands, which has been in place much, much longer, and they do know has been a huge success for them. Huge savings of corporate dollars for them. It's a line item in their budget. It's a permanent fixture. It's not going anywhere. They're very pleased with it. Of course, I think that's probably the impetus that then made them think, hey, let's try the forestation and see what that does for our bottom line as well. They're very proud of that program, as well as they should be. And in fact, I recently talked to one of their executives who's going to give me a sort of a slide of how they did their own internal valuation of those ecosystem services for purposes of the corporate decision makers that said, okay, yeah, we want to keep doing that. So ecosystem service policy integration in Houston. Again, you heard Jim Blackburn say there's not a lot of that going on. We want to see more of that going on. This is a way to start working toward giving the policymakers some ideas on ways to start doing that don't necessarily involve a hammer, but more of a, we need to do this because this is overall the best thing for our community. And for my constituents in the thought process of the policymaker. So for prairies, prairie restoration that helps control flooding, and we already starting to see more and more of that. Katy Prairie is conducting some ecosystem services studies on that concept. And one thing we do in this is that we talk a little bit about the fact that that studies are beginning to take place in the region. We want to give the policymaker a feeling that this is an active, vibrant process that he or she is going to continue to hear more and more about. Because oftentimes in those situations with policy, they kind of want to get on the front end of it, particularly if it's something that looks really interesting to them. So if they know that, oh, okay, I know there's some studies that I'm going to start hearing about that can help me feel like I've got what I need to be able to support this movement, they're generally more likely to do so. Harris County Flood Control District, of course, has various flood control measures in place that are green infrastructure oriented. I've already showed you some of them, talked a little bit about them. We hope there'll be more and more of those. Talked about Project Braze. Cypress Creek, is doing a lot to help preserve, in terms of green infrastructure and restoration to preserve Lake Houston. You heard earlier, it's our prime water source. Houston Wilderness was involved with 5 counties, and Jim was there, and Linda in the back, in a Lower Trinity River stakeholder meeting recently, where they're understanding now that their water, which is, you saw that, I think 3% of the waterway of the Trinity River's developed, but they recognize that their water is going to continue to be in high demand. So they're looking at how they need to continue to take care of their ecosystem services and their ecological functions to make sure that they continue to do what they can and they don't get overused or somehow impaired. In the Texas Coastal Exchange, that's Jim Blackburn's program he talked about, so we touch on that a little bit and tell the policymaker about it. Oyster reef restoration, all the huge reasons that's a positive for our region and why we need to bring back so many that we've lost over the years. Urban forestation, the good thing with the urban forestation is that effort by a variety of different key stakeholders and the business community. It's been around a while, so the policymakers have really big, they get that one for the most part. We've had freeway forestation, we've had a lot of urban forestation in parks and in public spaces, so they generally get the importance of that ecosystem service, but it's always important to remind them of the fact that it is indeed that. It's more than just aesthetics. It's something that contributes to our flooding and our air quality and that type of thing. And then through policy intervention and green infrastructure, our region can increase its natural capital. As Jim Blackburn said, and I agree, you talk numbers. It's very important to talk numbers on these issues. And the more we have these studies and the more that the academics and the research institutes can get these values, the more we'll be able to put this into this presentation and give them more knowledge of what those actual numbers are. We are very careful, though, that we don't give, and by we, I mean, at least when Houston Wilderness talks about this, we don't give them outside the region numbers, because when they've gotten those in the past, it doesn't resonate well. Houston has a culture of we want to know what's going on in our region, with our region, and that's real nice that Tennessee has, this much value for its whatever, but we don't care. We want to know what our value of our ecosystem services are. So we really want to try to capture those. That's why you don't see valuation numbers in here yet, because a lot of the valuation techniques, although good, are based on assumptions from other parts of the country, and it just, we have found, doesn't resonate well with policymakers. To retain long-term businesses and residents to the region, you can talk a lot about that, both from ecotourism to the Bio Greenway initiative. The people love to get out there on the bios and the trails, and they feel like they're out in nature, but the Heights is just half a mile away, but they still feel like they've been able to escape. Huge opportunities like that for our region. It attracts visitors to our region for a variety of things. It creates jobs. It improves the health of the residents. That's a growing area of understanding. And I know the Texas Medical Center is more and more interested in how our ecosystem services help our community with everything from from obesity to lower asthma rates, et cetera, et cetera. And then it reduces the risk of damage. You already heard a lot of that about it, and I actually am going to add a sentence after a couple conversations I've had. Policymakers understand risk as it relates to insurance, and I don't have a lot of that in here, and I'm going to add it because I'm finding out that that's a growing area of interest, that insurance companies are very interested in ecosystem services because it helps protect their risk, and then their bottom line looks better, and that would resonate with a policymaker. So I'm going to add more on that. And then moving forward, there's some things that we need to do. We need to find additional opportunities to be able to enhance and or preserve our ecosystem services that we already have, and hopefully to the extent possible, restore some where they've been lost. And then additional studies, we'll go a little bit into that. The fact that there are ecosystem services studies that we're working on getting funded so that we can know more about the valuation, put the economic value on those services, and then incorporate these services directly into infrastructure decisions. And this is where you hope to open up the floor to a policymaker to talk about what are some infrastructure decisions that you are working on right now that we might be able to look at incorporating green infrastructure as an option into that. And that's where I'm going to add this website as a tool for into the website. Anyway, that's it. So.
Okay, very good.
So we have this and the policy paper that you all are welcome to print and use as you need to.